All right, so today we are looking at commercial versus subsistence agriculture. And the goal is to compare these two types of agriculture, but more importantly, to use these as identifiers for other types of agriculture, which we will get into later this week. So, before we get started, though, let's talk about the question: how did the second agricultural revolution change society in relation to the Industrial Revolution? So we have learned that the Industrial Revolution is when all of a sudden urban areas exploded with the use of machines and tons of people migrated in because they wanted factory jobs to make, textiles or whatever, mass produced goods to sell to people. And everybody got jobs and it was great. But we never asked the question, how the heck did they eat? Which seems almost silly to ask. But when you think about it, you have to wonder, well, because of the Industrial Revolution, so did agriculture. Now, as everybody was moving to the urban areas, obviously they're not farming. There's no land in an urban area. They don't have the time to dedicate because they're busy working in factories. So this is when we start seeing other people grow food for other people on a major scale. So in the rural areas, you have all this land that was left behind. You have the inventions of machines, and farmers go, well, if we can use these machines to harvest more crops and grow more food, now we see the birth of commercial agriculture. Right. And we know that in the Industrial Revolution, demographics changes. The demographic transition model tells us in stage two. Stage two was started by the Industrial Revolution. That means birth rates stay high, death rates go down, population explosion. Great, we know that and we can say that, but what does that actually mean? So we have to think, well, death rates dropped because we started to be a little more sanitary. We're using sewers, taking showers or baths more often. But we also got better at agriculture, and the fact that we could not only produce a lot more food, but the steady production of food, and we knew how to store more food. So not as many people are starving anymore. Then when we talk about migration, we consider, well, obviously we see this huge rural to urban migration, which leads to having a bunch of land in the countryside that farmers could then pick up. And we see a drop in our agricultural density. And then finally we get to development, and the three indicators of development are health, life expectancy, how much money do people make, and education. So we already know that life expectancy is increasing, whether it be from the sanitation or from the food. We know the money people are making is increasing. More people are going to factory jobs, and it's not a lot of money, but it's more than they had before, and now they can buy stuff. And then we know education is getting better because when people have more money, then they can send their kids to school. Now, at the time, not every kid went to school, but it's a step in the right direction. So now let's go over this idea of commercial versus subsistence. And we ask the basic questions like, how many of you have a garden? Or have you eaten something you've grown? Or how many people have planted something in a garden? And honestly, not a lot of people, especially in the United States, because like most of you, you go to Publix or some type of supermarket to get your food every week. You're not spending 8 hours a day growing your own food. And if you do grow your own food, it's probably not enough to live on. And that's the first distinction we can make between the developed world and the developing world, is what type of agriculture are we performing. So this is the basic split between commercial and subsistence. We talk about purpose, number of farmers, machinery, and farm size. And it's a very straightforward breakdown. But remember, agriculture is not just commercial or subsistence. It's how we identify different types of agriculture. So first off, we're looking at the purpose of food. Straightforward, commercial farmers work to feed everyone. They're not trying to live off of their food. Commercial farmers are huge farms that grow like all corn and soybeans or whatever, and they can't live off of that. The goal is to sell that to buy the other things they need, where subsistence farmers have a variety of food that they do live off of. And if there is any surplus, they probably trade it to the local community, or they do sell it, but that's not the original purpose of subsistence agriculture. The original purpose is to feed themselves. Then we look at number of farmers, and we go, okay, well, in LDCs, they don't have enough money to go out and buy groceries. They're not working in some factory job. They're in a rural area, so they're going to farm, and that's what most people do, and that's what makes it subsistent. So a lot of people farming, whereas a small percentage in the developed world are farming. So then you ask the question, well, how is it that one person or few people can feed so many in the developed world, where you have all these other people working in the developing world, but they can only feed themselves? And that comes next in the machinery part. But real quick, what we have to pay attention to is that whatever is happening in the developing world is the trend for the entire world. We know that 6 billion to 7 billion people live in the developing world. And if we know that a majority of them are farmers, then that logic can tell us that the most common job in the world is farming. And that generally goes with any type of trend. But back to machinery. So in the subsistence agriculture world, people are using hand tools. Lots of people are working and using hand tools. This makes it labor intensive. Labor intensive is another identifier for certain types of agriculture. Whereas in the developed world, there's not a lot of farmers working, it's only one farmer, and they are still working, but they're using a lot more machines. Now, machines cost money, and that's why we call it capital intensive. Capital is the money it takes to start a business, so it takes a lot of money to be a farmer. But that's why they're so efficient. But at the same time, they're only that efficient because they buy those machines because they have so much land. If they didn't have all the land, it couldn't justify buying the machines, which takes us to our next point, the size of farms. So in LDCs, the developing world, if you have a lot of people farming using hand tools and it takes all day, their farms can't be large, not at least as large as commercial farms. But by no means is it that all subsistence is small farms and all commercial is large farms. These are just general trends. This is our basic split between commercial and subsistence, but there's one more identifier, intensive versus extensive agriculture. Extensive just means it takes up a large amount of space. Intensive means you don't have a lot of room. Once again, extensive agriculture, 9 out of 10 times is going to be commercial, and intensive agriculture, 9 out of 10 times is going to be subsistence. But that isn't always the case. There is commercial agriculture that's intensive, and there's subsistence agriculture that is extensive. These are just ways to identify different types of agriculture. An example of intensive agriculture, and what also takes us to another point about possibilism, is the rice farms in East Asia and Southeast Asia. Notice that mountains aren't the best for farming, so what these people are doing is literally carving out the side of mountain and creating terraces or terracing to increase the amount of arable land that they have for themselves for farming. This is an example of subsistence agriculture because it is just to feed them. But we're seeing not only agriculture take place, subsistence agriculture take place, or intensive, labor-intensive agriculture take place. We're seeing possibilism and people literally changing their society around them to fit their agricultural needs. Finally, we wrap this lesson up with coloring a map of the climates, because you have to know where the climates are on the earth, because if places share a similar climate, they probably share a similar type of agriculture. That can help you identify where these agricultures are, whether it be in Asia or Africa, South America, or North America. And that is it.